Inside a grand Roman church, a man in fancy pope clothes is on trial for his life. There's just one tiny problem. He's been dead for 9 months. His corpse, rotting and stinking, is propped up on a throne while a living pope screams questions at its silent, decaying face. This wasn't a joke. This was the Cadaver Synod of 897, one of the most bizarre events in all of history. The defendant couldn't speak, couldn't defend himself, and definitely couldn't object, because again, he was very, very dead. So, who were these people? The corpse was a guy named Pope Formosus. The angry, screaming man putting him on trial was the new pope, Stephen VI. This whole crazy show wasn't about finding the truth or doing what's right. It was about revenge. You see, 9th century Rome wasn't just a holy city full of prayers. It was a messy, dangerous place full of powerful families fighting for control. Think of it like a mean playground, but with popes and armies instead of kids and swing sets. It was total chaos. The whole thing started because of politics. Pope Formosus, when he was alive, had picked one family to be the big bosses of the empire. This made their rivals, a powerful family called the Spoletos, super angry. They felt cheated out of the top spot. So when Formosus died, the Spoletos made their move. They used their power to get their buddy, Stephen VI, made into the new pope. And the very first thing on Pope Stephen's to-do list was to get payback on the guy who snubbed his friends, even if that guy was already in a tomb. The plan was as disgusting as it was crazy. Pope Stephen ordered his guards to go to the tomb where Formosus was buried. They weren't there to pay their respects. Their job was to break open the grave and drag the 9-month-old body out into the sunlight. Imagine being one of those guards. You're told to go dig up a dead pope. It's a job that's both terrifying and just plain weird. The body was falling apart, but they had to follow orders from their furious new boss. They hauled the rotting corpse of Formosus through the streets of Rome. This wasn't a secret mission. Everyone saw it. They then cleaned him up, sort of, and dressed him in the fancy clothes he wore when he was the most powerful man in the church. Then came the main event. They dragged the corpse into the courtroom and sat him on the papal throne. Pope Stephen stood before the body, his face red with rage, yelling accusations. The entire church leadership, all the important priests and bishops, were forced to sit and watch this horrifying, ridiculous play unfold. They looked on in silent terror. The whole room was a circus of the macabre. Imagine the scene. A furious Pope Stephen VI, red in the face, screaming questions at a silent, slumped-over corpse propped up on a throne. The smell alone must have been unbelievable. This wasn't a trial, it was a madman's play. But here's the part that breaks your brain. How did the corpse defend itself? Did it just sit there while a living pope yelled at it? Except, that's not what happened. The corpse actually answered the charges. Can you believe it? A young deacon, probably the most terrified teenager in all of history, was assigned to be the corpse's lawyer. He was forced to hide behind the throne, trembling, and whisper answers on behalf of the rotting body. A boy, speaking for a dead man, in a trial for the dead man's life. So what were these terrible crimes? What could a dead man be guilty of? The new pope accused the corpse of perjury, which is lying under oath. He also accused it of having too much ambition. These were the big, serious charges. And the final charge was the most ridiculous of all. Formosus was accused of illegally switching jobs, moving from being the bishop of one town to being the pope in Rome. It was against the rules, sure, but it was like getting angry at a football player for switching teams, 9 months after he already died. Basically, these charges were a total sham. They were flimsy excuses. This whole crazy show was just Pope Stephen getting revenge on his old enemy. It was pure, nasty politics dressed up in a court case. Nobody was there for justice. They were there for a spectacle. And after all the shouting and all the terrified whispers from the kid behind the throne, the court reached a decision. The verdict came in, and to the surprise of absolutely no one, the corpse was found guilty. Guilty of everything. A guilty verdict meant more than just a bad name. It meant that every single thing Pope Formosus had ever done was now erased. Every law he signed, every priest he appointed, every decision he made. Poof! It was like he never existed. History was being rewritten by a bully. The punishment began right there in the courtroom. It got so much worse. Pope Stephen ordered the guards to rip the fancy, sacred papal robes right off the corpse. They tore the silk and gold threads from his body, leaving him in his dirty burial rags. This was the ultimate insult. All the honor and power Formosus ever had was stripped away in front of everyone. Every good thing he had ever done was declared fake. It was a message to the world. This is what happens to our enemies, even after they're gone. But the punishment wasn't over. Not even close. Pope Stephen VI, filled with a cold, terrifying rage, walked right up to Formosus's corpse. He pointed at its right hand. He gave a new order, one that made even the guards gasp. He commanded them to take an axe and chop off the 3 fingers the dead pope had used for blessings. This wasn't just random cruelty, it was the ultimate insult. Those 3 fingers, the index, the middle, and the ring finger, were the tools of a pope's power. With them, he blessed armies, crowned emperors, and forgave sins. By cutting them off, Stephen was trying to erase Formosus from history itself. He was saying, "Your blessings are worthless, your power is gone, you were never even here." So what do you do with a convicted, defrocked, defingered ex-pope? You can't just put him back in his fancy tomb. Oh no! The guards attached heavy weights to the mutilated corpse. They dragged its sad, broken body through the streets of Rome. Imagine the scene. A dead pope, once the most powerful man in the world, now being pulled through the mud for everyone to see. The spectacle ended at the Tiber River. With a final, unceremonious heave, they threw Formosus's body into the water, where it sank into the darkness. Case closed. Or so they thought. The people of Rome were horrified. They had seen angry popes before, but this was something else. This was monstrous. And then, something happened that turned their fear into righteous fury. Shortly after the trial, a massive earthquake shook Rome. It was so powerful that it badly damaged the very church where the crazy corpse trial had taken place. Nobody saw it as a coincidence. To the terrified citizens, this was a clear sign. This was divine intervention. God himself was angry about what had been done to Formosus. The ground shaking was heaven's verdict on Pope Stephen's twisted justice. And they decided it was time to deliver some justice of their own. Fueled by anger and fear, a mob of Roman citizens rioted. They stormed the papal palace, screaming for the man who put a dead body on trial. They found Pope Stephen VI, dragged him from his throne, and threw him into a dark, damp prison. His reign of terror was over. His end was not peaceful. A few months later, the man who prosecuted a corpse was himself judged. He was strangled to death in his cell, a quiet and grim end to one of the most bizarre chapters in history. The man who tried to erase another pope was, in turn, erased himself. And the story gets even weirder. The next pope declared the entire Cadaver Synod illegal. He ordered men to search the river for Formosus's body. A monk supposedly found it, caught in his fishing nets. The dead pope was cleaned up, given a proper burial back in the main church, and his honor was restored. This whole event proves that sometimes history isn't just a collection of dates and facts. It's a full-blown, unbelievable, darkly hilarious horror show. But if you think that's where this crazy story ends, you are so wrong. The political roller coaster in Rome was just getting started. The corpse trial was so hated that it created a huge backlash. A new pope named Theodore II took over. He immediately held his own meeting. He declared that the whole corpse trial was silly and illegal. He found the body of Formosus, which had been fished out of the river by a monk. Then he gave the dead pope a proper, respectful burial back in the big church. So, problem solved, right? Nope. This is where it gets truly bonkers. A few years later, another new pope came to power. His name was Sergius III, and guess what? He was one of the original guys who hated Formosus. You will not believe what he did. He declared the corpse trial was totally valid. He said, "Yep, that dead guy was guilty." And then he ordered Formosus to be dug up from his grave. For a second time, can you even imagine? The same poor body dragged out of the ground again to face another trial. It's like a terrible, hilarious zombie movie. History was literally repeating itself as a farce. This was round 2 of the weirdest legal battle ever, so they held another trial. The rotting corpse was put on display once more. All the old charges were brought up again, and surprise, surprise, the dead pope was found guilty again. But this time, the punishment was even worse. Pope Sergius wasn't happy with just cutting off the fingers. He ordered them to cut off the dead pope's head. This was pure petty revenge against a man who had been dead for years. After the beheading, what do you think they did with the rest of the body? That's right! For the second time, the headless, fingerless corpse of Pope Formosus was thrown into the Tiber River. It's almost like they ran out of other bad ideas. Finally, after all this digging up and throwing in rivers, the church seemed to realize something. They figured out that maybe, just maybe, putting dead bodies on trial was a bad look. It was causing riots and making everyone look insane. So a law was finally passed. It was a very simple rule. It said that from that day forward, no one could ever put a dead person on trial again. It took 2 corpse trials and a beheading for them to write that down. It just shows that sometimes the craziest rules exist because someone, somewhere, was crazy enough to make them necessary.